Hi Team Value, JJ here, welcome back. Well, Q1 2024 has ended and I can happily report for the portfolio I'm about to show you, we gained more than 30% for that quarter alone. How did that happen? Let's get into it, let's have a look. So here we go, here's the data for that portfolio on Interactive Brokers. It's a small and mid-cap portfolio we have here. I do have other stocks in another broker, but this is small and mid-cap, which I'm focused on mostly these days. And we can see here that it's 30.54% for that quarter for Q1 2024. And the S&P 500 made 10.16%, so significantly outperforming the S&P 500, triple the S&P 500. So that was a really good result. We can also see that the NASDAQ only got 9.32 for that quarter. So 30.54 was significantly outperforming the NASDAQ index. And there's not a lot of tech in this portfolio. There's a little bit. What I will tell you about this portfolio is that it's 8 stocks and it's mostly small and lower mid-cap range, and it's spread across different countries, including the US, Canada, 3 European countries, including Sweden. There's nothing from where I am in the world, Australia, New Zealand. It's just worked out like that. Just the way that I found stocks and for this portfolio. Let's get into some of those stocks. Now, just a note for the Art of Value Patreon subscribers and those who decide to join over there, I'm happy to talk more about these companies. I have talked about quite a few of these companies over there. We've had discussions over there. I'm happy to do that more. If you have any questions, it's not investment advice. I advise against copying or buying any trades based on anybody on the internet, on YouTube, Patreon, or anything like that. So the first one is Topicus, and I've been in this stock virtually from the IPO, which wasn't that long ago. And I've talked about it publicly before. I've made a video about Topicus in relation to Constellation Software, a number of videos. I'll link to one of them in the description here. But we can see here that at present, this is on ticker terminal, and I've put it to US dollars. It's a Canadian company. It's actually operated in Europe and the Netherlands, but it's the Canadian company because it's a spin-off. And we can see that it's a $7.4 billion company at this point, so it's getting out of small cap status into mid cap these days. And year to date, we can see it's up 29.9%, so nearly 30% up. And if we go to all here, we can see that it's up 74.1% over the time that it's been public, which is at this point a 19.4% CAGR, which is pretty good. And for me, it's up 70%, so I have actually managed to capture most of the compounding since the IPO, since the spin-off. I don't own the large cap Constellation Software that this was spun off from. I noticed that Monish Pabrai does own it these days in his mutual fund. I just made a video about the stocks that he had in his new mutual fund. I'll put a link in the description to that too, just if you haven't seen that already. He also owns Topicus. I saw he's just bought that recently. So that's interesting that he bought it in Q4 2023. It's about 3%, I think, of the portfolio, the mutual fund, and he has Constellation Software as well. But that's where we stand on Topicus so far. As I've said in other videos, Topicus is the same business model as Constellation Software, but operating in Europe, even though the stock is in Canada. Same business model, but in Europe, and it's a really big market. So if they can do the same compounding as they did with Constellation Software, you know, Mark Leonard is involved in this as he was with Constellation. And so if they can compound at the same rate and it could grow to the same size, that's what I'm hoping to compound over time. Now, if you're getting value out of the stock portfolio episode so far, I'd really appreciate it if you manage to hit that like button. If you're watching on YouTube or anywhere else with a like button, that would be great. It helps the algorithm to spread it to more people, and that's what we want. Thanks. Stocks like this never looked cheap. It hasn't really looked cheap if you're a value investor since the beginning, but if they can compound at a high rate, 19.4% is a good compounding rate, but maybe they could do more than that. We'll have to see. And by the way, this is not investment advice at all. You shouldn't copy trades from people on YouTube. And over on Patreon, I provide more information there, some research and some discussion on the stocks that I do own, the stocks that I'm researching. I'm not going to provide all the information here that I do. It's exclusive content over there, and so I won't reveal all the names of the stocks. Now, this is the next stock in the portfolio in terms of allocation. It's definitely in the small cap status still. It's 576 million US dollars worth. And we can see year to date, it's up 68%. So it's done very well. I can tell you it's not a tech stock. And I can also say that it is in a basket of stocks in the same sector. I've got 3 stocks, 3 companies in this sector of varying market caps, and there are a number of catalysts in this sector. This one's been doing well over the past year. It's up 191%, and I do think there's a lot of compounding to go. It's a small cap, so this has been responsible for a good chunk of the gain in the portfolio. I won't say the name of it here. I have talked about it on Patreon in terms of what it is, what sector it is in, and sort of more of the context about it. Now, this is another company, another stock in that same sector as the previous one, about the same amount of allocation. We can see it's up 35.3% for the year so far. It's a much bigger company. It's $3.8 billion worth at this point, but I do think there's a lot of compounding to go in this one too. I won't say the name of it again. You can see it on Patreon. I've talked about the sector. I've talked about the stocks, and it's not investment advice. This is just for entertainment, informational purposes. You should never copy trades of somebody on YouTube, some random person on YouTube or anywhere on the internet. You should do your own work. Over on Patreon, I'd like to show people how to do their own work on it over time, not just to copy trades. That's not what this is about. Now, this is the third company in that same sector. This is a much smaller market cap, nearly $56 million at this point, and it's up 60.3% this year. So it was even much lower market cap than that. And over the past year, actually, it has had 175% gain just over the past year. I haven't owned it for as long as that, but this group as a whole, this sector as a whole, as I said, is doing well this year and over the past year or so. And you can see that from this basket. It's an emerging sector, so this is one of the reasons I've got a basket. Again, I talk about this on Patreon. I've talked about the sector. Again, not investment advice at all. You've got to do your own work on it, but I find this an interesting sector. And in another portfolio, I've even got another position from this sector as well that takes in a wider scope in the sector. So all of these past 3 companies, these 3 stocks have been in the same sector, nothing to do with tech. So tech's risen a lot, especially AI related stocks. This is different. It's not to do with that sector, but it has been doing well. As I said, it's an emerging sector, and there are quite a few catalysts coming up, I believe, in that sector. So even though it's risen a lot in the last year to date and last year, I think there's a lot more to come in this sector. That's just my opinion. If we look at the AI exuberance, we can see that sort of flirting with a bubble, if not some in a bubble already. I don't believe this sector is anywhere near that just yet, but it could get there. I just don't know, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next year or so. This group so far of 4 stocks that we've seen are largely responsible for this good gain so far in this small and mid-cap portfolio. Now this next company, this next stock is from Sweden, and it's 354 million US dollars worth. So it's a small cap again, larger than that last one. It's got nothing to do with tech. This one is more industrial kind of company. And so far this year, it hasn't been contributing to that 30% gain because it's 11.7% down for the year. But we can see over the past year, we might as well have a look. It's 10% up over the past 1 year. But as you can see, all time, it's had a 42.2% CAGR over that time. So I'm hoping it'll be a long-term compounder. It's still a small market cap. So if it keeps on going, if it compounds at that rate, if it can do for a very long time, and I do think it has a long runway for growth, then I think this can compound for a long time. But this year, not doing so well so far. But because it's a long-term compounder with good returns on capital, then it should be fine, I think, in just my opinion, over the long term at the price that I bought it. So I haven't owned this stock for very long. It is up a little bit for me. Again, I'll talk about this on Patreon from time to time and more in depth. And this one is Tiny Limited, and it's a smaller allocation, but I have been adding to it recently. It has been going down. As we can see, year to date, it hasn't contributed to that 30% gain for the year to date. It's 4.5% down. It's a fairly complicated story about this. I have made a video about this before. Tiny Limited, Andrew Wilkinson, the co-founder. It's known as the Berkshire Hathaway of tech, or that's one of the labels that's been given. And I did notice that Monish Pabrai has added it to his portfolio, his mutual fund portfolio, just in Q4 2024, which interested me, obviously. I added it before that, and I have been adding to it more recently. It hasn't been doing well, since I've had it over the past year or so. But, this is a long term for me. It's not a huge allocation. I started off just as a starter position. It is interesting that it's sort of like Constellation Software. and that they're buying mostly tech companies, not all tech companies, but small. I understand that Bill Ackman has a small investment in it. Now Monish Papri's bought into it, and I think Howard Marks' son invested in it early on. And so there are these great investors that are in it as well, which interests me. That's not why I got into it, but I do like where it's going. It's very early days. It's a small cap, 300 and nearly 305 million US dollars. It's based in Canada, this one. And Andrew Wilkinson's already got a long history of building the company from scratch. He's not old. He models himself as a value investor based on Warren Buffett. And that's easy to say. It's easy to say that you can model yourself on Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, but can you come up with the goods? And we'll see what happens over time. As I said, I'm willing to raise allocation to this over time, depending on how it goes. I have done a video on this before if you want to check that out, and I'll put that in the description for more context and a bit more about the company, a bit more about the founders. This one is another small cap from Sweden. I seem to be liking the Swedish companies. I also own Spotify, a much larger company, which I've talked about before. Another Swedish company. People often think of it as a US company, but is actually a Swedish company as well. This one is $387 million market cap, so small again. And we can see that it's actually down 21% for the year, so not doing well over this past year to date, and we can see it's up 36.3% over the past year, so definitely up and down, but I'm hoping that it will turn up soon, obviously, but it hasn't contributed to the year-to-date performance at all. So those first few companies that I showed you have been contributing a lot, and this company detracting somewhat from the performance, but it is a much lower allocation than the other ones. Now this one's another European company, and I've just added in the past couple of weeks. I have been talking about the 2 new portfolio positions that I've added, and this has been one of them, so it hasn't added or detracted from the portfolio. But year to date, it's actually down 15.3%, and that is one of the reasons that I got into it, because it is a long-term compounder, and we can see, if I go to all here, it's compounded at 40.1% CAGR since it's been public since 2017. That's 903% over that time. And it's around a $9.5 billion market cap in US dollars so far. So it's mid-cap status. I'm more interested in small caps, but I think this one can compound. That's just my opinion. And there are factors that have made it go down recently. I've talked about this on Patreon as well, the thesis for it and why I bought it. But as I said, not investment advice, just for information and entertainment purposes only. Don't copy anybody on the internet trades. This is why I'm reluctant to talk about the stocks. Now feel free to add comments to this one if you have questions. I definitely prefer that you join Patreon and ask questions over there. As I said, I talk about specific stocks and research over there rather than on YouTube or anywhere else. Now if you're watching this episode on YouTube, I'm going to put a link here to the video that YouTube thinks that you in particular should watch next. So go and see that now if you want to. And thanks to everybody for watching or listening wherever you're doing that, and I'll see you in the next one.